Good morning. So I have one announcement to start our day. If anyone misplaced their glasses, we do have them. Was it you, Conrad, for real?
Well, my talking so I can't see. It's a Warby Parker box with, looks like.
Yes, it's mine.
Fair Conrad.
All right, we are going to get started this morning, and our first speaker is Christine Lattin. She is an associate professor in the biology department at Louisiana State University. She studies the neurobiology and behavior of birds. She grew up cardboard puzzling and discovered wooden jigsaw puzzles during the pandemic. She loves all types of wooden puzzles, but her favorite are the old ones with the delightful attic aromas and the high probability of dog-chewed pieces. She has ended up with a lot of puzzles of birds and a lot of puzzles with George Washington, but no puzzles of George Washington with birds yet, unless she found one yesterday. Christine.
Oh, I do need a clicker. Is there a clicker? Slides. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for getting up today to come to this talk about George Washington puzzles. I know many of you were up puzzling late last night. So thank you very much for allowing me to give a talk at the Puzzle Parley. This is my first in-person Parley. I did the virtual one during the pandemic. And yeah, let me get right into it. Oh, and I just wanted to thank the conference organizers. Like, you did such a great job. This has been a wonderful weekend. I know the Parley did a ton of work, and I know all of us appreciate you. Okay, so as those of us who like the smelly old puzzles know very well, puzzle tastes have changed over time. Some of the things that people loved to puzzle back in the 1900s to 1940s and 50s are not the things that people prefer to puzzle today. So some of the top puzzle subjects of this bygone era include fox hunting. I loved fox hunting puzzles, right? Tons of those. This is one that I did a few years ago, Milton Bradley premiere. It was a really nice puzzle, actually. Another bygone subject, cottages. Yay, cottages, especially with thatched roofs and flowering gardens around them. And I did put a little asterisk by this one because I think a lot of people still like cottage puzzles. This is one of the subjects that has kind of withstood the test of time a little bit better than fox hunting. And this is a Victory artistic puzzle that does have a few little figure pieces, and I enjoyed doing this one. Okay, and then another one, right? Old men sitting around in taverns, right? People love these in the vintage era. I don't really know why. I mean, it's a nice scene, right? There's these guys, they're having a great time by the fire. This is a unit puzzle that was a really nice puzzle as well. But yeah, old men sitting around in taverns, this guy's having the best time. But one vintage puzzle subject truly stands alone, right? And of course, that's George Washington. And the Delaware.
So this, I will admit, started collecting George puzzles a little bit as a joke, because it was funny to me that there were so many of them, right? And it's like, there's not a lot of John Adams puzzles, or even like pretty famous presidents like Abraham Lincoln. There aren't a ton of Abraham Lincoln puzzles out there. There are many, many, many George puzzles.
And so I started collecting these a little bit like, haha, isn't it funny? There's so many of these. A lot of them are really nice puzzles, right? Like there's a lot of different brands, there's a lot of different cutters who made George puzzles. We actually saw some in Anne's talk yesterday, some really nice George puzzles that I was very appreciative of. And as I started kind of collecting these, first kind of in jest, and then more seriously, I really have started to appreciate them and appreciated a lot of the kind of, I've learned some history. There's some really interesting art historical aspects in these puzzles. You see a lot of different cutting styles. And I would actually like to give a little plug for if you are a collector, collecting on a subject, I actually think is really fun. And finding puzzles is always delightful, but if you have something where I see a George puzzle now, it's just, I'm like, yay, it's a George puzzle, right? And that's like a little extra fun and excitement. And then I think when you have a subject and you can kind of compare the subjects of the puzzles and how they're treated, I think you do learn a lot. Okay, so I did ask Anne Williams when I met her last summer. I got to visit her at her home in Maine. It was very kind of her to let me visit. And I look like a giant standing next to her. Why were puzzlers of vintage era so obsessed with George? And she said, well, the bicentennial of his birth was in 1732, and that was kind of the peak of the 1930s puzzle craze, and the fact that they kind of coincided was probably part of that. And I think that seems very, very likely. I'm sure George mania was sweeping the nation at that point, and it made its way into puzzles as part of that. Another thing, is I think that a lot of us turn to puzzles when things are difficult, and they're very comforting, they're very absorbing. Obviously, a lot of us got really into puzzling during the pandemic, and in the early 1900s and 1930s, a lot of people did puzzles during the Great Depression, during the wars, right? And I suspect that George was also kind of a comforting figure to people during hard times. And I think he does in a lot of these puzzles embody a kind of kindly yet heroic ideal that was probably sort of a nice thing to kind of focus on and make people think that, yeah, America is still a good place, and there's still, things are bad now, but we have good values, and we're going to get back to it. So I'm going to give you a brief tour of some of my Washingtonia, and Washingtonia is a word that I made up, that is, featuring vintage wooden jigsaw puzzles that feature America's first president, often in sort of a contemplative or heroic pose. And Google will tell you that Washingtonia is a genus of pollens, but it is what I'm going to call the puzzles that I'm about to show you. Okay, so the structure of my talk, many of you probably have heard the eulogy of George Washington, that he was first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen. So that's going to be kind of how I'm going to structure the talk. And then I am going to show you what I think is a very exciting piece of Washingtonia that combines two very popular vintage puzzle subjects. And then I'm going to pose the important question, who is the George Washington of 2024, right? Because it's not George Washington anymore, unfortunately. We don't have a lot of George puzzles today. Okay, so I do think when you look at these wartime puzzles of George, they're quite interesting. This is a Siege of Boston image, and it has the little title down here. I don't know who the artist is on a lot of these, so if you happen to know, please tell me, because I would like to know who the artists are on some of these. This was about a 400-piece picture puzzle exchange puzzle. This is one of my earlier pieces of Washingtonia, so these were from kind of 1907 through maybe 1920. Picture puzzle exchange was actually in Boston, appropriately enough, and a lot of these puzzles are cut by Isabel Ayer, who ran a jigsaw library, rented puzzles out, and cut puzzles. And you can see this is a push-fit puzzle. It's missing a few pieces. It's missing 3 pieces, but it's still a really wonderful puzzle. I really enjoyed doing it. It was super hard. It took me like 2 weeks. And there appears to be some kind of interesting surrender thing happening here. And then Washington, we've got him in the middle. He's often in the middle of these images, and he's often like bigger than everyone else. which I sort of think is I think he was a tall man, but he's often just like larger than life. And he's often doing kind of interesting things with his hands, which is kind of, almost like a Christian icon, which I find sort of fascinating. And he's, I think someone is surrendering to him, but, he would never gloat, right, over a victory. He looks very dignified. He's accepting the surrender, and, there's a lot of exciting things happening here. A lot of these wartime images you'll see are all sort of taking place in the winter, which I'm not an expert on the Revolutionary War, so it may actually be completely historically accurate. The siege of Boston did end in March, so it's probably there was snow on the ground. But I think there's also a symbolic quality to the winter, where it's like this was the end of the U.S. as a colony. It was about to be the spring of America as an independent nation. So I think there's a sort of artistic reason for that as well. Okay, here's another wartime one. This is the darkest hour, which is just before dawn, right? So we've got, even though it's the darkest hour, light is shining on Washington, who is kind of over here, looking off into the distance and thinking deep thoughts. I don't know, I assume this is probably on the eve of some great battle, and I don't know what it would be. This is a Milton Bradley Premier puzzle. Milton Bradley Premier, it's kind of like, think of them as kind of knockoff pastimes. They're very nice puzzles. They're, they have often interlocking pieces. Sometimes they have color line cutting, but not always. And then there's a bunch of figure pieces that are kind of scattered throughout here. The cutter of this puzzle, I don't think, was particularly inspired by the scene. There's just like it's like a horse, and it's got like a little thing it's pulling, and there's a triangle here. So there's nothing really patriotic or America themed in the figure pieces, but I do like this image. I think it's kind of exciting, and it has something that I really often like in George Washington puzzles, which is like in the puzzle, they're kind of like audience surrogates, right? Where people are like, oh my gosh, it's George, right? And they're like, look at it, look, there he is. So they're kind of, having like a fanboy moment of seeing their hero off in the distance. This one is, I really like this one. It's kind of exciting. I don't know who the cutter was. I don't know who the artist is. It didn't have a title. It was just like, I think it was just like it was in a baggie, right? I got it on eBay. But it's kind of a cool cut. It's very sort of whimsical, right? There are these like almost some of these are maybe figure-shaped pieces. The cutter looked like they were having a good time, and they did a good job with the color line cutting. It's not a big puzzle, but it is kind of a fun little puzzle because of the unusual cut. And something exciting is happening here, and I don't quite know what it is, but like there's a guy holding back a crowd. Like, don't come in here. George is saying something really important, right? And he's like pointing at he's got like a finger, right? I think it's like, look, listen to me. I'm telling you something important. He's pointing at something on the desk of this person. I don't know who this is, but it's exciting. Again, you've got George's full face. Everyone else is kind of turned either away or sort of towards George. He's close to the center of the frame. I really like this one. And then this is almost like a little bit of more of like a mix of kind of wartime and domestic, because we have Martha Washington visiting headquarters. And so we've got George in the middle, and Martha is next to him. And unfortunately, some of these Milton Bradley puzzles, you can see like there's a little bit of wear on the edges that makes the image a little hard to see. This is another Milton Bradley Premier puzzle. And I like this one because, George is not only a general, but he was also a devoted husband, right? And if George is the father of our country, in a lot of these images, you can see that Martha is the beloved mother of our country, right? And everybody in the picture is turned towards them. They're in the center. Often, they will be in the colors of the American flag, which I sort of love, right? So George is in blue, Martha's in red. They're kind of, everything again, it's a winter scene, right? And everything is, kind of washed out looking, and they're the sort of vibrant center where everyone is kind of turned towards them. This one does, and it has a big W figure piece, which I was like, yes, W for Washington. There's a flag in here somewhere too, I can't really find it right now. And there is a turkey, which I was like, this is a reference to the fact that Benjamin Franklin wanted the turkey to be the national bird. Maybe I'm reading too much into this. I've spent too much time looking at these George puzzles, but it's kind of a fun one. Okay, so that brings us to the first in peace puzzles, and I had to cross out peace, spelled puzzle way. Yeah, I thought that would be cute, I don't know. And then, this is the one that I had before. This is a really beautiful pastime. I love this puzzle. And it's, George is in the middle. He's darker here than the rest of the image. And he's got his hand kind of over his heart. And he's, looking forward to the future of our nation. And this one, again, it's got the people being like, oh my gosh, it's George. And often, especially in these peacetime images, you see a child, right? Like, he's the father of our nation, and there are all these children that I think are supposed to kind of symbolize the future of America too, right? The child's kind of got his hat off, and he's gazing at George with, I would say, adoration, right? I love this puzzle. It's beautiful. It has beautiful color line cutting, lots of really wonderful figure pieces. It's in great shape, but I do think there are a lot of really big missed opportunities for figures that could have been a little bit more suited, right? It's like a number 2 right in the middle of George. They did ones, like you could have just made it a 1, right? He was our first president, why'd you give him a 2? And then there's like this giant X, and it's like they did W's, you could have done a W. I don't know. I mean, these women had to cut a lot of puzzles, so they were just, it's probably just a job to cut her 485, but there are some nice, there's a star here. And I did actually pull out all the figure pieces so you can see what they all are. There are a lot of really nice, so I don't have any pictures that have George and birds in the image, but there are a lot of bird figure pieces here, which is nice. And a lot of them look like they're probably supposed to be, maybe dove-esque or dove-adjacent, right? And then we've got some patriotic eagles in the tree too. And I kind of like this one where it's a little guy facing the opposite direction as George. So some of the figure pieces here are really, really nice. I don't want to denigrate the talents of Cutter 485, but just think, she could have put a 1 on him, right? This is kind of a cool one because it is a J.K. Strauss sculpture puzzle, which I don't know if you've ever seen any of these. They are 3D puzzles. They basically glued 2 of the same image together, and then they cut away, it seems like, the top image to kind of give this 3D effect, right? So George and all of his kind of, buddies here are kind of sticking out. And these folks are sort of sticking out. There's some little pieces here that project, and then the rest of it is the second layer behind. These are cool puzzles. They're grid cut, just not my favorite, but I thought it was really fun because of the 3D effect. And this is Washington's dream of our nation's future commerce. Again, he's doing this kind of interesting like icon sort of thing with like 2 figures out, or maybe he's just trying to point in a polite way. And again, he's a little taller than everyone else, right? And I don't know exactly how this personifies like a dream fulfilled exactly about commerce, but there is a mix of what looks like working class people and maybe more upper class people. And, everything is busy. It's like a port scene, there's tall ships. So, maybe it's, and then we have our nation's flag. So maybe there's some aspects there of like, yes, this is what we want America to be, busy and thriving. This is probably, I think, the jewel of my Washingtonia collection. This is a picture puzzle mart puzzle. And Picture Puzzle Mart, as I'm sure many of you know, was run by Josephine Flood in New York on Park Avenue. And she mostly, she had some other cutters too, I think, but she mostly would commission really, really nice pastimes for her clients who were quite wealthy. And these pastimes are always great, I think. Like, they're wonderful puzzles, but the Picture Puzzle Mart ones are like extra wonderful. Like, they're really, really, really good. I was so excited to get this one, and extra excited that it was a George and Martha puzzle. And it's super colorful. It has wonderful figure pieces. I actually have another slide that has all the figure pieces, and we can look at those more in depth. This is a High Hintermeister. This one was signed here. so I knew who the artist was. And really beautiful puzzle. It has some of the same things that we see in a lot of these George puzzles where, George is in blue, Martha's in red, and the sort of white of their hair and their trims, again, the colors of the American flag, right? And they're a little bit actually more dourly dressed, I would say. They're a little bit more somberly dressed than their hosts in this scene. We're all much more in these kind of jewel tones, like greens and purples. And it's just a beautiful puzzle. It's really well cut. I think, again, George is a little bit bigger than his host, and his hands are massive, right? His hands are just like, whoa. It's definitely, I don't know if it's, realistic at all, or if it's just supposed to sort of show him as this, like, larger than life figure. We've got a child clinging to him again, right? The father of our nation. I do think one aspect of this scene that I want to mention that is a little jarring for modern audiences is the presence of, there are enslaved people in this image, and they all seem so happy to be part of the scene. And I think that's obviously a very unrealistic and idealized version of what slavery was like, right? But yeah, it's probably partly of its era. And then I think the cutter here, these are gorgeous figure pieces. She used ink cutting to kind of make some nice details on like the dress here. And we've got like the chair here has like slats in it, and the cutter just made all these little details. A lot of these figure pieces were probably designed by the cutter. They were maybe not used in a lot of other puzzles, kind of, somewhat unique. And, they're gorgeous. I love this puzzle. She didn't seem like she was that inspired by George, right? There's nothing really like America or patriotic here. That's okay. It's beautiful. But nothing really George specific here. Okay, and then here is another pastime, but this one is very old actually, and I was able, because of features of the box and the box lid, information from Anne Williams that's now on Tara Rogers' site, her Chestnut and Hemlock website. If you ever have a pastime and you want to try to figure out when it's from, there's wonderful information that you can use to actually kind of pinpoint the date. And in this case, I was actually able to figure out that this puzzle is from 1916 because of individual kind of characteristics of the box. And again, pastime puzzles, the cutters did different things in terms of how they decided to connect the pieces, right? This one has these nice little curls. This is a scene called Washington Returns to Mount Vernon, and I actually was able to track down the artist by looking at the Library of Congress website. This is a lithograph in their collection. It was actually Washington Returns to Mount Vernon at the end of, during Christmas, at the very end of the Revolutionary War. So it was, the war ended in September, and this is the Christmas scene. And I really, really love this scene. I find it very touching. They've got like women, and they've got children here, and there's a child clinging to Martha, and the elderly. These were all the people that were left behind during the war that they're kind of reuniting with in a peacetime scene at Christmas, right? We've got George and Martha are kind of in dark red and blue and white, and then this child that's greeting Martha, he's in sort of a bright red and a bright blue. And I think it's like, again, they're the kind of older generation of America, and he kind of represents the future of America. And he's even got this nice star-shaped figure piece kind of around him, which I think is sort of lovely. And then, this cutter was inspired, right? She's got like USA up here, and then she's got like a George and a Martha, facing the same direction as George and Martha in the scene. There's a heart, because we love George. And then there's another heart over here. There are eagles. There's definitely, Cutter 27, I think, was also a George fan. And interestingly, this artist, Jenny Brownscombe, there were enslaved people at Mount Vernon, but I think she was probably a little bit less comfortable with that, and she kind of relegated them to the background here. Or at least she didn't want to, highlight that. And then these are just some of the figure pieces that I pulled out so you can see them a little bit better. My favorite, I think, is probably the frame around the child, but of course, George and Martha in the USA. This one is an interesting puzzle. Okay, so then it's like, okay, wait, first in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen and women. This is just kind of a piece, I think, of like Washington fan art, right? Like, we've got Washington's birthplace. He was born in Pope's Creek, Virginia in 1732. And then we have this like giant floating George head, which I love. It's like a collage style image. And this is kind of a cool puzzle. The artist, I do know, because it's signed down here. It's missing, unfortunately, a few pieces, including some really unfortunate pieces of Washington's forehead are missing. But we've got the date in this puzzle, and you can see that 1934 right here. And then we've also have E.H. Hovis is a name, and I think that's probably the cutter, although I guess it could be the recipient of the puzzle. And yeah, it's kind of cool to have those cutter designed figure pieces. And the cut is fun. It's just kind of an unusual cut. I really enjoyed this puzzle. And yeah, again, we love Washington. Okay, so I talked about how puzzle subjects and puzzle tastes have changed over time. And I have this like little, these are some of the things that people used to like to puzzle more than they do today. So imagine how excited I was when I found a puzzle that combined fox hunting and George Washington, right? So we have this Venn diagram. I found something in this little sliver here. So I present to you, George fox hunting. This one is called First Gentleman of Virginia, and it is another Milton Bradley premiere. I don't know who the artist of this is, and you may be wondering, did George Washington fox hunt? Yes, he did. According to the Mount Vernon website, he loved fox hunting. He actually went fox hunting for the first time at age 16 and had a journal, and he would keep track of all of his fox hunts. He fox hunted over 150 times, and the Mount Vernon website's like, he didn't always kill the foxes. Which is like, okay. Again, modern tastes have changed, right? Like I think most of us now think fox hunting is pretty sad, and we feel more sympathy with the foxes.
Also, just a little tip to add to you. When the war ended, Lafayette gifted Washington 2 blue-tick coonhounds. Those were the first 2 blue-ticks in the United States.
Oh, I don't know if everyone heard that, but Mark was saying that Lafayette gifted Washington 2 blue-tick coonhounds, and those are the first of that breed in the United States, which I didn't know. That's cool. So I'm sure all of you can tell me a lot about a lot of the stuff in these puzzles, and I would love to hear it. Okay, so this brings us to the important question. Who was the George Washington of 2024, right? Because we don't see a lot of George puzzles in modern puzzles. What do I mean by this? What am I talking about? Well, I think we need a real person, not like not like Harry Potter or a Disney princess, right? But an actual recognizable person with larger than life qualities. Somebody who I think ideally is inspiring, maybe has overcome adversity to achieve great things. They should have an iconic appearance where you see them in a puzzle and you're like, I know who that is, right? You see George in a puzzle and you're like, yeah, that's George Washington, right? They should be very popular as a puzzle subject, so there should be a lot of puzzles of them. I'm actually curious, so I have somebody that I am going to say I think might be the George Washington of 2024, but I'm curious if any of you have any thoughts about this. Or you can continue to ponder it, right? Yeah.
Not necessarily currently alive.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be, they don't have to be currently alive, no. And in fact, the person I'm going to propose is not. But, okay. So here, yeah, anyone?
Ruth? Gator Pins?
Yeah. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is actually that's a pretty good one. I thought about her, actually, and I think she is a strong contender for the George Washington of 2024. Yeah, I think that's a very good thought. Yeah, there have been a lot of Ruth Bader Ginsburg puzzles that have appeared on Instagram, and I do think that she fits all of these and does have a very iconic appearance. You see her in a puzzle and you know exactly who she is, right? Yeah, I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg is a very strong pull. Well played, yeah. Anyone else?
Nelson Mandela.
Nelson Mandela, yeah. That's actually a pretty good idea too. I haven't seen a ton of Mandela puzzles. Yeah, but he is somebody, she would like to. So if puzzle makers out there, make a Mandela puzzle. Yeah. FDR, so I haven't seen a lot of FDR puzzles. But yeah, again, I do think these people could be good puzzle, like they could be this, right? Somebody like Martin Luther King Jr. as well, right? So some of these people, like, we do recognize them, and they could be really good puzzle subjects. Yeah, do you have one?
Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs.
Apple.
Yeah, that's interesting. Again, I just haven't seen that many Steve Jobs puzzles. Yeah.
Keanu Reeves.
I wish I could see more Keanu Reeves puzzles.
Muhammad Ali.
Muhammad Ali, yeah. These are all really interesting ideas. Yeah, anyone else? Marilyn Monroe. Oh, that's interesting. Again, Elvis? Okay, yeah, one more.
Jeff Lebowski.
Jeff Lebowski, yeah. I want to hear all of your thoughts, so please come and talk to me later. I'm going to skip forward because I don't want to take too much time. Okay, I was going to say Frida Kahlo. People love Frida Kahlo on Instagram, right? Like, there's so many Frida Kahlo puzzles. Like, and look at all. I just did like a search for Frida Kahlo puzzle, and there were like dozens and dozens and dozens that came up. I mean, she's very iconic looking. All of these puzzles are colorful, which people really like nowadays, right? And yeah, she's inspiring. She's a really talented artist. She dealt with chronic illness her whole life and a lot of personal trauma, and still made this beautiful art. So I kind of like it's Frida Kahlo, but I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg is actually also a pretty good one because there are a lot of RBG puzzles out there too. Okay, so I'm basically to the end of my talk. I do have a QR code. Those of you who are not as tech savvy, the way you use these is you take out your cell phone, you click on it with your camera, and then it takes you to a link that will go to a Google survey. And if you have a piece of Washingtonia, I would actually love if you could fill out I have a Washingtonia puzzle survey, and you can actually submit pictures of your puzzle there or just information. I would love to hear about who made your puzzle, what's the subject, any information that you can provide. I would actually love to see what Washingtonia you all have as well. And, I'm actually over time. Just love George so much. But I would be happy to take any questions or comments if we have any time.
Yeah.
Portraits of George Washington prior to his presidency don't really exist. And he was like 60 or so. Do you have any puzzles that portray him any younger than, 55, 60?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a great question. So Jessica's asking, all of these puzzles, George seems to kind of be the exact same age, right? Like, he's always kind of like older George. Do I have any pictures or puzzles that have pictures of George as a younger man, or as a child? I do not. I imagine there are probably some out there of like iconic scene when he's like cutting down the cherry. Yeah, he cut down the cherry tree. There's probably something out there of him as the child being like, I kind of tell a lie. But I've never seen those, and one of the things I do think is kind of funny is that a lot of times in these puzzles, it's like it's George because he's got like the wig and it's like the George scene, but you're like, wow, I'm pretty sure George wasn't that handsome, right? Some of them, it's like a very idealized version of George, right?
60 years old when he was elected as president.
Yeah, he was one of our older presidents, right? But he always kind of looks like a little bit middle-aged, and sometimes he's very handsome. One more question, Phil.
Did you anticipate a surge in Washington puzzles in 2032?
I was actually really hoping someone would ask that, right? So we're going to have the tricentennial of his birth coming up in 2032, right? I would be excited if there was, anyone here, any modern cutters, maybe for the tricentennial, want to make me a really cool George puzzle.
Currently working on a 4,000 plus piece version of the crossing of the Delaware.
Okay, Mark is working on a 4,000 piece crossing of the Delaware. That sounds amazing.
I just wanted to say that representing Great Britain here, probably more puzzles than anybody else has got to be Queen Elizabeth II.
Oh,
Yeah.
Queen Elizabeth II.
That was my
figure. I know she's not your queen, but
Yeah.
she is to a lot of people still.
Yeah, and there
I
are.
don't think anybody will ever have her sort of charisma for British people going forward. I'm sorry to say, our current king, it's noticeable that his Wentworth jigsaws have been discontinued.
Oh, for sure.
But then Queen Elizabeth was a jigsaw fan, and
Yes.
and Charles has cancelled his subscription to the British Jigsaw Library, so he doesn't get my money. But I suppose our sort of equivalent would have been Nelson, and for similar reasons, particularly around the First World War, we have a lot of puzzles of First World War action, and also a lot of puzzles and prints came out celebrating Trafalgar and all those events of that war.
Oh, that's a wonderful perspective. Thank you, Jackie. Yeah, so Queen Elizabeth, there are tons of puzzles of
Yeah,
her.
right from almost babyhood, right?
Yes, and people love pictures of her as a child too. All right, I gotta wrap it up. Thanks, everybody.